The sun hung low over the quiet suburban street, casting a warm golden hue across the manicured lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges. It was a picture of suburban tranquility, a place where nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. People waved at each other with smiles as they pulled their cars into their driveways. Birds chirped merrily, and the soft hum of a lawnmower in the distance was the only noise breaking the silence. But in the house at the end of the block, Karen was anything but tranquil. Known throughout the neighborhood as the unofficial queen of the HOA, she kept a sharp eye on everything. Her home was the epitome of order, each flower pot meticulously placed, each blade of grass perfectly cut. It wasn't just about the appearance of the neighborhood. It was a reflection of her control over it. If something was out of place, Karen noticed. She sat in her front room, sipping from a porcelain cup as she scanned the neighborhood through her living room window, her eyes darting from one house to the next like a hawk on the hunt. Her gaze paused on a new arrival. At a house that had been empty for months, recently sold to a newcomer. Who could it be? She thought. As if on cue, a figure appeared on the lawn, pushing a wheelbarrow filled with soil. It was a man. A black man, she noted, her brow furrowing. He wasn't the type of person she typically expected to see in this neighborhood. His skin was dark, his posture confident as he knelt down to pull weeds from the garden, the late afternoon sunlight casting long shadows around him. Who was he? The man seemed entirely out of place, and yet there was something else, an air of calm confidence that didn't match the anxiety growing in Karen's chest. She stood up, gripping her cup a little too tightly. The more she watched him, the more unsettled she became. Was he even supposed to be here? She stared for a few moments longer, her mind racing through a dozen possibilities. Maybe he was some sort of contractor hired to work on the property, but still something didn't sit right. Why was he alone, without a crew? And why had she never seen him before? Her instincts kicked into overdrive. I can't just let this go. Karen's sense of control, the one thing she always prided herself on, was slipping, and it sent an uncomfortable jolt through her. She had to investigate, to make sure that everything was as it should be. Her eyes flicked toward the street, empty, save for a few parked cars. It's up to me. She was the one who kept things in line around here. Nobody else would do it. She grabbed her sunglasses and marched out the door, determination in her steps. As she crossed the lawn, the crunch of her heels on the gravel sounded loud in the otherwise still air. The man, engrossed in his work, didn't seem to notice her approach. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp and filled with authority, though she hadn't intended it to be. The man looked up, his face friendly, but his eyes held a quiet wariness, sensing the tension in her tone. "Can I help you?" he asked, standing up and brushing his hands off on his jeans. "I just wanted to know what you're doing here," Karen said, her voice steady but cool. Who was this person? And why was he working alone on this property? Her gaze narrowed slightly as she crossed her arms. "Are you sure you belong here?" The man's eyes flickered with surprise. "I live here," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'm just taking care of the yard." Karen paused. Taking care of the yard. The word settled in her mind like a bad taste. This didn't feel right. "You're sure?" she asked again, her suspicion growing. "What's your name?" Karen's heart raced as she stood in front of the man, her eyes scanning him, searching for any indication that he might be lying. Why was he so calm? She expected him to be flustered, defensive, maybe even intimidated by her questions. But instead, he just smiled, brushing the dirt from his hands, like it was nothing more than an insignificant detail. His casual response made her uneasy. "I live here." His words echoed in her mind, but they didn't match the image she had of this neighborhood, a place of pristine lawns and well-behaved residents who adhered to the rules. He couldn't possibly be a homeowner, could he? She narrowed her eyes, her grip tightening on her purse strap as she forced herself to speak with even more authority. "What's your name?" she asked again, her voice edged with suspicion. "Marcus," he replied, his voice smooth but not condescending. "Marcus Thompson." There it was again, the calmness, the confidence that gnawed at Karen's insides. She hadn't heard the name before, but that didn't mean much. This neighborhood had seen several new faces lately. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The man's presence, the ease with which he carried himself, all of it felt foreign to her. "You know, I'm not sure I've seen you around before," Karen continued, her tone taking on a more interrogative edge. "How long have you been here?" Marcus hesitated, his expression shifting slightly as if pondering how much to reveal. But the pause only lasted a second before he spoke again. "About 3 months." 3 months. That didn't add up. If he'd been here for 3 months, Karen would have noticed. She prided herself on knowing everything that went on in the neighborhood. If Marcus had been here for 3 months, why hadn't she seen him? Was he lying? Her mind raced. Had he somehow slipped under her radar? Or was this all part of some elaborate scheme to make the neighborhood feel wrong? She hummed, her gaze shifting over his yard again. The bushes were well trimmed, the flowers freshly planted. Everything appeared neat and orderly, perhaps too orderly. Was he trying to make an impression? Trying to blend in? Trying to deceive her? Before she could probe further, a new thought struck her, a thought that made her pulse quicken with a sense of urgency. What if this man didn't belong here at all? What if he was some kind of intruder, taking advantage of an empty house? Her eyes flicked to the windows of the nearby homes, and she saw the slight shift in the curtains. The neighbors were watching. The curiosity was palpable in the air. It wasn't just her questioning anymore. There was something about this situation, something that felt wrong, and it was up to her to fix it. "I think I need to call the authorities," Karen said suddenly, her voice rising with the certainty of someone who knew they were in control. Marcus stiffened, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he were already anticipating her next move. She didn't wait for him to protest. Whipping out her phone, she dialed 911, her fingers trembling just enough for her to notice, but not enough to betray her calm facade. What was she doing? The question echoed in her mind, but she pushed it away. She had to protect the neighborhood. She spoke into the phone, her voice cold and clipped. "Yes, there's a man doing yard work at a property, and I don't think he's supposed to be there. He doesn't look like he belongs in the neighborhood. Could you send someone to check it out?" She hung up, her breath shallow. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. Was this too much? The question nagged at her, but the resolve she had built inside herself held firm. She was doing the right thing. She had to be. As she turned her attention back to Marcus, her eyes hardened, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in his gaze, a subtle shift that made her stomach tighten. Was he about to react? The phone call was made, but the seconds that followed felt like an eternity to Karen. Her heart hammered in her chest, the weight of the decision now pressing down on her. She hadn't expected things to escalate this quickly. Had she done the right thing? Karen stood stiffly, her fingers still gripping her phone, her eyes not leaving Marcus for a second. His gaze had shifted from calm to something more guarded, more alert. His hands were now folded in front of him, as though he were preparing for something. What was he thinking? That lingering question gnawed at her. She could almost feel his eyes sizing her up, and it unsettled her in a way she didn't fully understand. A part of her hoped that the police would show up quickly and confirm what she already knew. He didn't belong here. There was no way he could be part of the neighborhood. But a seed of doubt began to sprout in her mind. What if? What if she was wrong? What if she had jumped to conclusions, allowing her discomfort to cloud her judgment? No, she couldn't think like that. She had to maintain control. She was right to be cautious. After all, she was the one who knew this neighborhood inside and out. She had worked tirelessly to ensure it stayed pristine, orderly. Everyone followed the rules. So why was this man, this stranger, allowed to break them? Karen's eyes darted back to Marcus. His posture remained calm, unshaken by her accusations. It angered her. Why wasn't he nervous? Why wasn't he protesting more? Was he trying to make her feel foolish for questioning him? Was he playing some kind of game, testing her resolve? The sound of sirens in the distance caused a small jolt of adrenaline to shoot through Karen's veins. Finally, she quickly turned her back to Marcus and scanned the street, hoping to spot the flashing lights, the blue and red colors that would confirm that everything she had done was justified. They'd sorted out, and then he'd be gone. Her grip tightened on her purse as she heard the familiar rumble of a squad car approaching. The sirens grew louder, the noise bouncing off the quiet houses, and before long, 2 officers pulled up to the curb. They both emerged from the car, their uniforms sharp, their expressions unreadable. The tall officer in front had a stern gaze, his hand hovering near his belt, the other officer close behind. Karen wasted no time. She practically marched up to them, her voice steady but quick. "Officers, I'm so glad you're here. This man, he's not supposed to be here. I've never seen him before, and he's doing yard work at this house without any permission." The officers exchanged a brief glance but said nothing, their attention focused entirely on Karen as she continued to explain. "I've lived in this neighborhood for years," she said, her voice tinged with frustration now. "And I've never seen him before. I know everyone here. He's clearly out of place." Marcus watched them closely, his posture unchanged, but there was something in his eyes now, something almost calculating. Karen tried not to notice, but it tugged at her awareness. Was he taking this all in? Was he waiting for the right moment to pounce? The officers turned to Marcus, and for the first time, Karen saw a flicker of hesitation in their eyes. They asked him a few questions, his name, how long he'd been living there. And he answered with ease. When they asked for proof, he calmly pulled out his phone and showed them the homeowner's documents without so much as a flinch. His name, Marcus Thompson, was clearly listed. Karen's mouth went dry. No, this wasn't supposed to happen. The officers glanced at each other, their brows furrowing in silent confusion. They looked back at Karen, who was starting to feel the familiar weight of doubt pressing on her chest. What was happening? This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had been so sure of herself, so confident in her right to question him. Now, everything was unraveling. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, his voice calm but firm. "It appears Mr. Thompson is the homeowner. His name is on the property records." Karen's stomach lurched. No, this can't be right. The world around her felt suddenly tilted, as though her grip on reality was slipping. She tried to speak, to assert her version of events, but her voice faltered. The officer held up a hand to stop her. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding. But unless you can provide further proof, we can't take further action." Karen's face burned with the sting of humiliation. How could this be happening? Everything she had worked for, her control, her reputation, was beginning to collapse. And standing there, watching her unravel, was Marcus, silent, watching her every move. Her mind raced, trying to find a way out. Was she really about to lose this? Was her control over the neighborhood, over everything, slipping away because of one man? The officer glanced at Marcus, then back at Karen, his expression unreadable. "Is there anything else, ma'am?" the officer asked. Karen's heart skipped a beat. Had she just lost? The tension in the air was suffocating, and for a moment, the world around Karen seemed to slow, every passing second stretching into eternity. The officers, silent and composed, stood between her and Marcus, the faint hum of the distant sirens still lingering in the air like an ominous reminder of the unfolding drama. Karen felt her heart beat harder in her chest as she stood, frozen, caught between the undeniable truth in front of her and the overwhelming panic building inside her. The officer who had been speaking to Marcus turned his attention back to her, his gaze sharp, almost questioning. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step back for a moment while we sort this out. There's no need for further escalation." Karen opened her mouth, but the words lodged in her throat. Her mind screamed at her to say something, anything, to maintain control. She couldn't let this man, this intruder, walk away from this without consequences. He had to be stopped. But her thoughts were a whirlwind now. Had she misjudged everything? Was she really going to look foolish in front of her neighbors? A cold sweat began to bead on her forehead as the officers spoke in hushed tones, exchanging looks that Karen couldn't read. She glanced around the neighborhood, searching for any signs of support from the neighbors, but their windows remained closed, their curtains drawn. The whispers of suspicion she had hoped for, confirmation that everyone else saw what she saw, were conspicuously absent. Why weren't they speaking up? Her breath grew shallow as the weight of isolation pressed in on her. She was alone in this. The neighborhood wasn't going to back her. They weren't even watching. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease. His hands were relaxed at his sides, his shoulders back, and his expression calm. He wasn't worried. He wasn't worried at all. That unnerved Karen more than anything. Was he playing some kind of game with her? His calmness, his almost bored demeanor, made her feel like she was the one being judged. And the way he held her gaze, as if waiting for her to crack, made her stomach churn. The officers turned toward her again, their expressions softening slightly, though the edge of professionalism still lingered in their words. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside for a moment." She didn't move, her feet glued to the sidewalk. This was wrong. The sweat on her brow felt like a betrayal. She had been so sure, so convinced that she was doing the right thing. But now, the fragile walls of her confidence were crumbling, one stone at a time. What if this wasn't just a misunderstanding? What if she had gotten it all wrong? The officer took another step forward, his voice lowering to a more sympathetic tone. "We understand your concern. But unless you can provide further evidence that this man doesn't belong here, well, there's not much we can do." Karen's breath hitched in her chest, the words feeling like a punch to the gut. There was nothing else. She had nothing left, just the suspicion that had gnawed at her from the very beginning. The seconds felt like hours as Karen stood motionless, the world swirling around her in a haze. Marcus hadn't moved. He hadn't even flinched. In his silence, he seemed to tower over her, not physically, but in the way he carried himself. The longer this dragged on, the more it felt like she was losing something deeper, something intangible. Her grip on the neighborhood, her reputation, her control. Out of the corner of her eye, Karen saw the neighbor who had been watching from the window earlier step onto their front porch. The man, middle-aged with graying hair, had a pained expression on his face, as if he had just realized something important. He looked directly at Karen, then turned his eyes toward the officers. This was it. Karen's pulse quickened. The man was stepping forward, but she didn't know which way he was going to lean. Was he going to back her up, or was he going to throw her under the bus? "Is everything okay here, officer?" the neighbor asked, his voice tinged with concern, though it was impossible to tell where his allegiance truly lay. Karen's eyes narrowed, a flicker of hope igniting within her. She wanted him to side with her. She needed him to. She turned sharply toward him, her expression pleading, but the neighbor's eyes slid past her and locked onto Marcus. The glance was brief, almost dismissive. "He's good," the neighbor said simply, shrugging lightly. "I've known Marcus for a while. He's been living here for months. I saw him move in. This is his house." The ground beneath Karen's feet felt like it had just dropped away. No, he couldn't be serious. The officers nodded, glancing at Marcus again before looking back at Karen. "We're all set here," one of them said. "Unless you have any other information or questions, we'll be leaving shortly." Her mouth went dry as the last bit of her resolve shattered. The officer's words were final, his tone a stark contrast to the flurry of emotions swirling inside her. As the officers turned to leave, Marcus shot her one last look, one that sent an uncomfortable shiver up her spine. There was something almost pitying about it, as if he could see right through her. She stood frozen, the cold air pressing in on her as the squad car slowly pulled away, its tires crunching over the gravel. The neighborhood returned to its eerie silence, but something had irrevocably shifted. What would they think of her now the moment the police car turned the corner and disappeared from view? Karen felt her chest tighten. The world around her seemed to close in as the sound of the engine faded into the distance. The neighborhood had returned to its usual quiet, but something was different now. Something had changed. It wasn't just the situation with Marcus. It was her. The fragile hold she had on everything was slipping away, piece by piece. Her eyes wandered to the neighbor who had intervened. He was standing by his front door, still watching her with a blank expression, his arms folded across his chest. Karen's stomach churned as she realized the truth. He hadn't come to her defense at all. Instead, he had sided with Marcus. He had sided with the person she had been so certain didn't belong here. Why? Karen's mind buzzed with questions, but she couldn't seem to find the right answers. Every explanation felt hollow. She had been so sure. She had been so certain that her suspicions about Marcus were justified, that he was an outsider, someone who didn't belong in the pristine world she had worked so hard to maintain. But now, every detail seemed to slip through her fingers. His presence in the neighborhood, his confidence, his calm demeanor in the face of her accusations. Had she misjudged him entirely? The thought gnawed at her. What if Marcus really was who he claimed to be? What if he had every right to be there? The weight of that realization pressed down on her chest, suffocating her with an unfamiliar discomfort. She had always prided herself on knowing everything, on seeing every detail, on maintaining the upper hand. And yet, in this moment, she felt completely lost. Her gaze flicked back to Marcus's house. The windows were dark, the yard neatly tended. It looked just like any other home in the neighborhood. Everything appeared normal. Too normal. But that couldn't be right, could it? Karen took a shaky breath and turned her back to the street, heading toward her own house. She could feel the eyes of the neighbors on her, even if she couldn't see them. She knew they were watching, whispering, wondering what had happened, what she had done. The front door closed behind her with a soft click, and Karen leaned against it, the weight of everything sinking into her bones. She had never felt more exposed in her life. But as she stood there in the quiet of her home, trying to gather herself, her phone buzzed in her pocket. The sudden sound made her jump. With trembling hands, she pulled it out, half expecting to see a notification from the HOA, a message that would confirm her suspicions, that would somehow make everything right again. Instead, it was a text from an unfamiliar number. "I know what you did, and you'll regret it." Karen's heart stopped. Her mind raced, scrambling to make sense of the words. Who was this? She thought back to everything that had happened. The phone call to the police, the confrontation with Marcus, the neighbor's unsettling indifference. Was this some kind of retaliation? Had Marcus somehow found a way to send her a threat, a warning for her to stay out of his way? Or was it something more sinister? The thought sent a cold shiver down her spine. She stared at the message, her mind reeling. The familiar, comforting walls of her home suddenly felt suffocating. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that someone was out there, waiting for her to slip up, to make another mistake. Had Marcus sent this? Was he trying to intimidate her into silence? Karen's pulse quickened. There was no way she was going to back down. She wasn't going to let this stranger, this intruder, make her feel small. Her phone buzzed again, this time with another message. "We're not done here." Karen's hands were shaking as she stared at the screen, her mind racing with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. Who was behind these messages? What were they threatening her with? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her doorbell ringing. The sudden noise made her jump, and for a second, her heart skipped a beat. Who could it be now? She hesitated for a moment, then made her way to the door, the floor creaking beneath her feet as she walked. She opened it slowly, half expecting to see Marcus standing there, smug and unbothered. But instead, it was the neighbor, the one who had sided with Marcus earlier. His face was pale, his expression tense. I didn't want to say anything earlier, he began, his voice low, as though afraid of being overheard. But there's something you need to know. About Marcus. Karen's chest tightened again, her mind reeling with a mix of dread and curiosity. What now? Karen's heart hammered in her chest as she stared at the neighbor, who now stood on her doorstep, looking more uneasy than ever. His face, usually calm and controlled, was now taut with anxiety, his eyes darting nervously toward the street, as if he feared someone might be watching. The silence between them stretched, and Karen's grip on the door tightened. What did he know? Her mind spun with possibilities. Was this just another attempt to get her to back off, to let Marcus get away with whatever he was hiding? Or was there something more to this neighbor's warning? Something even darker than she could imagine? The neighbor took a cautious step forward, lowering his voice even more. I don't know how to say this, but Marcus, he's not just some random guy. I've seen him around before, and not just here in the neighborhood. Karen's breath caught in her throat. Not just here. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as though saying it aloud would somehow make the truth real, make it undeniable. The man glanced over his shoulder one more time before meeting her gaze. A few months ago, he was involved in something not good, some trouble in a different town. I'm not saying he's dangerous or anything, but I'd be careful if I were you. Karen's mind was already racing, sifting through his words. What kind of trouble? The vague nature of his statement only deepened the pit of uncertainty growing inside her. Why didn't you say anything sooner? Karen asked, her voice trembling, her thoughts whirling. Why wait until now? The neighbor's face tightened, and he shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flicking toward Marcus's house. I didn't want to get involved. I just figured he'd keep to himself and not cause any problems here. But after what happened with the police earlier, and now with the threats, he trailed off, shaking his head, the unease still lingering in his voice. Karen's stomach twisted. Threats. So it wasn't just the cryptic text messages she'd received. Something more was happening here, something that felt wrong. The neighbor seemed to hesitate, as if weighing whether or not he should reveal more. Finally, he took a deep breath and spoke again. Look, I know it's risky, but you need to know this. Marcus has been on the move for a while, bouncing from place to place. I've seen him show up in different cities. I don't know what he's running from, but... The words hung in the air like an unfinished puzzle, and Karen's mind struggled to make sense of it all. Who was Marcus really? The calm, composed man she'd seen standing in front of the police had been a mystery from the start, but now the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, and they didn't add up to the person she thought she knew. What if he wasn't just a random homeowner at all? Her thoughts raced as she stared at the neighbor. The shadows of doubt cast long and dark across her mind, and her nerves were taut with the uncertainty of what she had just learned. The threat she had received earlier now took on new weight. What was Marcus hiding? What had he done before? And what was he planning now? The neighbor's voice lowered even further, and Karen had to lean in to hear his words. If you've received threats from him, then you're not the first. There are others, people who've tried to call him out, but they ended up disappearing, one way or another. I didn't want to believe it at first, but disappearing. Karen repeated, her throat dry, her mind unable to fully process the words. The neighbor nodded grimly, his face pale. I don't know what he's involved in, but it's not something you want to get too close to. Stay away from him, Karen, for your own sake. The silence that followed his warning was deafening. Karen stood frozen, her pulse pounding in her ears. Disappear. Her skin prickled at the thought. Could she really be in danger? She felt the weight of the neighbor's words pressing down on her. The warning not just about Marcus, but about everything she had assumed, about her role in the neighborhood, her control over it. This wasn't just about a neighbor's quiet lawn care anymore. It was about something far more sinister, Something dangerous. As Karen closed the door, the darkness seemed to close in around her, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. The house felt suffocating, the walls pressing in on her as she stood in the quiet. Her mind raced with questions, but no answers came. The text messages, the police, the neighbor's warning, and now the realization that she had been completely wrong about Marcus. It was all spiraling out of control. Who could she trust? Suddenly, there was another knock on her door. A second knock. This time, more forceful. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it him? Was Marcus coming for her? The knock at the door came again, harder this time, more insistent. Karen's breath hitched in her chest as she froze, her mind racing. Was it Marcus? Was he finally coming to confront her after everything that had happened? The weight of the neighbor's warning still hung over her, the word disappear echoing in her mind like a terrible omen. Her heart pounded as she moved towards the door, each step feeling like it took an eternity. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob, but before she could even turn it, the doorbell rang in quick succession, sending a jolt of panic through her. Whoever was on the other side wasn't going to let up until they got inside. "Karen, it's me. It's Tom. Open up," came a familiar voice through the thick wood of the door. Her relief was instant, but only momentary. Tom, the friendly neighbor from down the street, wasn't who she had expected. She quickly unlocked the door and swung it open, her face betraying the tension she still felt. Tom stepped inside, looking over his shoulder nervously before shutting the door behind him. His eyes darted to her with a mixture of concern and unease. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I saw the cops earlier. And, well, I know this is going to sound strange, but I need to talk to you." Karen's stomach twisted. "What now?" I've heard things, Karen," Tom continued, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "About Marcus. About why he's here." A cold shiver ran down Karen's spine as her thoughts flickered back to the conversation with the neighbor, the cryptic warnings, the strange messages. She stepped back from the door, motioning for Tom to sit. "Is this about what the neighbor told me?" she asked, trying to steady her breath. She felt as though the walls were closing in around her, the house now feeling smaller than ever. Tom nodded, his face grim. "Yeah, it's not just rumors anymore. I've seen things that don't add up. Marcus isn't who he says he is. He's dangerous. He's been moving through the area, and I think—" He stopped abruptly, his eyes darting to the window behind her, as if something outside had caught his attention. Karen's gaze followed his, but there was nothing there, only the quiet suburban street, empty and still under the dim light of the street lamps. Tom lowered his voice to a near whisper. "I don't know if it's too late to get out of this, but he's dangerous. I've seen people I thought I knew, disappear after getting too close to him. I didn't think he was capable of it, but now—" He trailed off, and Karen could see the terror in his eyes. "I think Marcus is dangerous, and if we don't do something about it, we could be next." Karen's head spun as the room seemed to tilt beneath her. Everything she thought she understood was crumbling before her eyes. Disappearing people. Threats. A dark past she hadn't seen. The reality of the situation was sinking in deeper with every word. She was caught in something much larger than a simple HOA dispute, and the consequences could be far more devastating than she had imagined. I can't just walk away," Karen muttered, the words falling from her lips before she could stop them. She had to do something, anything, before it was too late. But what? How could she fight something she barely understood? Tom's face softened, his eyes filled with regret. "You have to be careful, Karen. It's not just about Marcus. It's about what's behind him. There's a network of people. They have eyes everywhere. You think you've been getting threats. You don't know what you're messing with." Karen's pulse quickened as she stared at him, the weight of his warning settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. A network. Eyes everywhere. The words sent a fresh wave of fear through her. Who was Marcus really? Who had he brought with him into her neighborhood? Just as she was about to speak, the sound of a car door slamming outside made both of them freeze. The tension in the room thickened. Tom moved toward the window, peering through the blinds. His face went pale as he turned to Karen, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's him, Marcus. He's outside." Karen's breath caught in her throat as she watched Tom's face, his eyes wide with terror. The air around them was thick with a sense of impending danger. Her heart thudded against her ribcage as she felt the full weight of the situation pressing down on her. Marcus had been here for a while. He was watching her. The text messages, the warning. Everything was suddenly connected. She wasn't just dealing with a neighborly dispute. She was caught in a web that she had no idea how to escape from. The knock at the door, the one she had been dreading, came once again. This time, it wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. The knock at the door echoed through the room like a hammer. Tom's eyes locked onto Karen's, wide with panic. For a moment, neither of them moved. The weight of the situation pressed down on them both, thick and suffocating. Tom's face was pale, beads of sweat dotting his forehead as his body tensed, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Karen could feel her heart racing, every muscle in her body taut with fear. She didn't know what to do next. Her mind was clouded by the warning from the neighbor, the cryptic text messages, and Tom's revelation that Marcus wasn't just a quiet neighbor. He was a shadow moving through the streets, a threat waiting to strike. She had thought she was in control of this neighborhood, but now it seemed like the rules had changed, and she was no longer the one holding the power. The knock came again, louder this time, more forceful. There was no escaping it. "I'll go check," Karen whispered, her voice barely audible. Tom grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "No, don't open that door, Karen. If it's him." Karen pulled away from him, her pulse racing. "I have to. I have no choice." She knew she couldn't run. She couldn't hide anymore. The game was no longer about lawn care or neighborhood disputes. It was about survival. And Marcus was standing on the other side of that door, waiting. With a trembling hand, Karen reached for the doorknob. Every second felt like an eternity as she turned it slowly, each click of the mechanism heightening her sense of dread. Finally, she opened the door a crack, just enough to peer through. Standing in the dim light of the porch was Marcus, his expression unreadable, his posture relaxed but somehow intimidating. He wasn't holding anything in his hands, but Karen could sense the danger in his stillness. It was like he was measuring her, waiting for her to say something. Anything. "Marcus," Karen said, her voice shaky but strong. "What do you want?" His lips curled into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What I want, Karen, is simple. I want you to stop digging into things you don't understand." The words sent a shiver down Karen's spine. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I'm not afraid of you. Not anymore." Marcus's eyes darkened, and for a brief moment, Karen saw something in them. Something cold, something dangerous. But then the moment passed, and he stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said, his tone almost apologetic. "But now that you're involved, there's no turning back. You should have stayed out of it, Karen." Karen's stomach twisted as she processed his words. Involved. Was this all a game to him? Was she just a pawn in whatever twisted plan he was a part of? Before she could respond, Tom moved quickly behind her, his voice cutting through the tension. "You don't scare us, Marcus. We know what you're up to." Marcus didn't flinch, his eyes shifting to Tom, then back to Karen. There was a moment of heavy silence, the kind that makes the air feel thick and electric. Then Marcus's face softened, and he chuckled, the sound low and menacing. "You really think you know what's going on here? You're both in way over your heads." At that moment, Karen heard something, a soft rustling from behind her. She turned just in time to see Tom's face go pale, his eyes widening with shock. The door behind her was slowly closing on its own. No, not just closing. It was moving, creaking, as if something, or someone, was pushing against it from the other side. She whipped around to face Tom. His eyes were filled with terror. He wasn't looking at Marcus anymore. He was staring past her, at something unseen in the darkness. Before Karen could turn to see what it was, everything went black. A sharp pain shot through her head, and the world seemed to tilt. She staggered backward, disoriented, her vision swimming. When she blinked, the darkness faded, and she found herself sitting on the floor of her living room, groggy and confused. Tom was gone. The door was wide open. And Marcus, he was gone too. Karen's head spun as she tried to get to her feet, but something cold and metallic glinted from the corner of her eye. There, lying just outside the door, was her phone. Its screen cracked. The text message that had once terrified her now burned into her memory. "We're not done here." Karen scrambled to her feet, her legs unsteady as she rushed to the door. But outside, there was no sign of Marcus, no sign of anyone. She stepped out onto the porch, her breath shallow as she searched the empty street. The neighborhood, once so familiar, now felt foreign. The danger wasn't over. The game had just begun.